And it's great to educate, but then you also have to like protect yourself too, right? So
It's true.
one time at Walmart, I wore rubber boots because it was raining, and I didn't have a car yet. I do now. Woot woot. But rubber boots because it was raining, and a hoodie sweater, and I was in university, and I was getting some candy and a portable speaker. It was during exams, so I was like, I'm gonna stay up on my candy and get this speaker so I can listen to music while I do my work. And I get followed all around Walmart. I get my candy and my portable speaker. I ring through the cash. I pay for everything. I put it in my pack sack. Oh, yes, I had a pack sack because I'm a student and I don't drive. So I put it in my pack sack at the cash after paying, and I get asked to open my bag at the entrance of Walmart. It's a procedure. Okay, yeah, I get that, but why? They weren't checking everyone's receipt on the way out, but suddenly they needed to check my receipt. I don't know if it was because of my race, like I'm fairly white passing, but then I can be kind of brown looking too. It just depends on the day. And I'm wearing rubber boots and the hoodie and the pack sack. So like I definitely feel profiled, and I'm educated, so I'm about racial profiling or even just class profiling. So I'm feeling it, and I'm overwhelmed, and I'm in school. They made me check through my bag on like three multiple occasions. Like they kept, like while I was there, I opened the first thing and they're like, oh, well, that's not good enough. I want you to look in the next one, and I want you to look in the next one, all three pockets. Now, I worked at the mall during that time, so I know they don't have a right to rifle through my bag, but I'm trying to show them that, like, I'm not stealing from them. You are wrong. So they continued to make me go through my bag on like three different asks. So I'm hysterical at this point. I zip up my bag, I leave, I'm crying. People in the mall know me. They're like, "Oh, Cece, what's wrong? Come into my store, give me a hug. It's gonna be okay." Um, and then I'm working in the mall at that time. So my current boss at that time was like, Cece, I think that you overreacted in that situation. I said, oh, why? So and so. And they're like, oh, because you're not even native. You're not even brown. So she's, your dad has blonde hair and blue eyes because he had been to my store because I worked in the mall. Um, so my boss at the time working retail was casting her version of my identity on me, and saying that I didn't have a right to be upset for being profiled in the same mall that I work in the community, in the economy that I'm helping support. So, needless to say, I don't work there anymore, and I don't talk to that person anymore. That particular boss and I were quite close. She used to actually let me drive her car sometimes. Like, I thought she was really nice. But she didn't understand, or for whatever reason wasn't able to reconcile, because I made a scene and I was not brown enough. I was white to her. So sometimes you need to just block those people and rid them in your lives. Like sometimes you can't educate, and you can't burn yourself out educating, whether you're like, whatever shade of the rainbow you want to be,
Hmm.
or feel, identifying with. Sometimes you have to just protect your spirit and energy. But I mean, sometimes it's worth a good dose of education too, especially if it's someone you love.
Hmm.
Has anybody had that like experiences with like people, either close coworkers or people close to them that you really care about, that are, walking that edge of racism?
Yeah. At my current job, actually, I do have people that lots of different offices that I work for, and people that I'm close working with, that I care about. But then, that the conversation, it comes up, and I'm thinking to myself, it's like, okay, well, what can I do to educate? What can I do to kind of maybe welcome into a different mindset, or at least set a boundary, like, hey, this is not okay to say around me, or really it's not okay to say anywhere, but I want you to at least know that within what power I have, it's not okay to say around me, right? I mean, I would wonder, I mean, how long did you, like, so after that incident happened at the mall, how much longer did you have that job for?
A couple of weeks, and I just like gave up some of my shifts and ended up like moving into another role. It was just like at the end of my time in university too. So I was like getting into like jobs that were in my field. So I was lucky, I guess, in that way.
Mm-hmm.
If I couldn't have exited that situation, like if I was still working in the mall and didn't get a job in my field, I imagine I would have switched stores, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if I made too big of a scene, I wonder if anybody would want to hire me. I don't know. Once I switched stores, because I
Yeah.
used to jump around in the mall a lot. But yeah, I guess I'm not sure
Mm-hmm.
what would happen if I try to go back and work there. I did make like a video and kind of blast about it, so maybe I'd get some shade. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. And that's like one of the things too. It's like, when you're working a position and like that job is supporting you and it's keeping the roof over your head and the lights on, it's like you do kind of have a line to walk. You kind of have to make sure you're standing up for what you believe is right, but at the same time you're not leaving yourself homeless and destitute, I mean, because it could just be like enough of those incidents, somebody just checks off a box on something and, oh, you know what, you're out the door, we got somebody else that's younger that's going to replace you, and it's like, oh my god, like, what do you do? What do you
Do you
do?
get that, Janet? Like as an activist and as a professional, like do you get that push-pull of like I
And I
want to say something but I don't want to ruin it?
absolutely. And all the time. So that HR situation that I shared with you guys is exactly that. And I think like just working or living in a small town, nepotism is so rampant here, and it's actually exhausting. Like in your case, if security isn't the ones to protect you, or if you can't go to HR, it's like, okay, who do you go to? And these companies don't have any sort of like diversity and inclusion policies, or they don't have third parties that would do maybe an internal investigation of these individual functions. So it leaves you at a loss. And absolutely the same HR situation, it was exactly that, where it was like, where else do I turn? Who investigates the HR department? And what does that mean for me? Like, I can never probably work in that field again. Of course, I was forced to resign because how could I work in a toxic environment moving forward? It just wasn't going to happen. And that was a case where I tried to consider all my options. It was like, well, do I speak to a external lawyer? Do I speak to the union that's running the company? I tried to look for resources, and they all kind of said the same thing. Well, this person has been here for a really long time. They're senior. If we try to investigate this any further, they're likely just going to say, oh, this was all due to performance issues. And so it gets really hard to prove, and it's really sticky. So like we see this all the time. Like I remember there was a project that we were working on at Algoma about a year or two ago, where it was like, if something happens to a student at large, where do they go to maybe file a complaint? How is that going to be handled? Is it confidential? Is it safe? So what are they doing about that? And so we actually had to develop a committee just to sort of evaluate all of those little internal processes and come up with ways that we could create like a safe space or a safe avenue that if somebody felt discriminated against in the workplace, or maybe it was harassment or violence even, that they have an avenue to go and report that, and that there's confidence that hopefully it's going to be investigated and resolved appropriately. But how many of those cases actually turn out, and not just like at the university, but in any setting, like how many do those cases kind of turn out favorable for the victim that's happening to, right? And I don't really have an answer, because I feel like everywhere that I've worked, that has always been sort of like something that was lacking. And there is no real place to turn when something like that happens. I think that there is a very specific timeline. I don't know how forgiving that they are. So you can file a complaint with the Human Rights Commission of Ontario if you wanted to, but I believe that you only have I want to say it's an 8-month window to do so. So that also kind of puts a lot of pressure on the victim. And sometimes in order to protect yourself, you may not want to go and do that right away. So it all comes down to not only organizational policies, but I think definitely on the provincial and federal level, there's just not enough laws and avenues in place to kind of protect the worker when stuff like this happens.
Yeah, That's a really good point. So I practice in employment law and human rights issues in the employment context. And, you know, one of the areas that I'm hoping to one day get into is a more proactive approach to help connect employers with resources so they understand what their obligations are. Because, you know, Jeanette, like what you've described is like a lack of policies and a lack of training. Like when, and so basically under the you know, there's different pieces of legislation that requires employers with, you know, more than 5 employees to have posted where everybody can see what happens when this happens, what happens if you're harassed, what happens if you're sexually harassed, what happens if you experience racism, who was it by? Well, then it'll go here. Should it get, you know, this is the conditions under which a third party investigator will be retained. And if they don't have that, then, you know, already they're breaching their obligations and making the job more difficult. And then, like you said, we're in this small town. So even if you do go and you go to the Human Rights Tribunal and you're successful, and say you even get that remedy where they put you back in your job, how much do you want to be in that flipping job? You know, when you know they're not going to educate themselves, they're going to take it as a slap on the wrist. They're probably going to, in some way, push you out and make you feel uncomfortable and welcome. Like, if I would love to work for an employer that, you know, recognized this is, thank you for calling us out. We need to do a system overhaul. And there are a few of them, but obviously that's like few and far between. So I think you have like a very good point to say the legislation is reactionary. Like, not to expand too much or get too out there here, but I mean, I just think about who is running the businesses, right? What is their education? When, if they ever did, when did they learn about residential schools? When did they learn about slavery in Canada? Did they ever, you know? And like, what's their context for what do they understand about what it means to be a woman in a workplace? Are any of them women? Are any of them, you know, it's a huge, I think, burden that an employer has. And I feel as though it very rarely gets discharged. And I think when you're in a small town as an employee, you really have to, a lot of people really have to pick their battles, because even if they're right, they might not get vindication, because what if there's no person in the room, like you said? Like, what if there's no person to back them up? How are they going to prove that feeling that I think most of us have experienced, where it's like, and for me, not with racism, but that feeling that you experience where you know from tone, you know it's wrong, and then you write it down on paper and it really doesn't seem that bad, and it's like this weird kind of systemic like gaslighting that goes on, and you got to fight all of that maybe on your own. Like, it's a tough system for people who experience harassment, and particularly covert you know, experience like covert systemic racism or sexism or any of the isms, really.